Good morning, APCUG. Can you see me?
No.
No? All right.
It would just be a small U.
How about that? Is that better?
Yes.
I didn't know I was going to have such a long introduction. It made me sound pretty important. So, not sure I'm really that important, you guys. I hope you're all having a great time in Las Vegas. I used to get out there when I was editing Smart Computing, and I visit with you guys, and I remember all the craziness and the shenanigans, and and I kind of miss that sort of stuff. I was going to say it's nice to see you, but I can't actually see you. All I see is John Kennedy, which is not all that exciting, really. I'm sure you're having a good time in Las Vegas. I am having a great time in Nebraska in a basement. I'm sure I'm having just as much fun as you guys are. So I'm going to pop back over to my presentation. Here we go, I think, right?
Yeah.
Okay. Well, listen, first of all, thanks for having me. This all started, I think, because I went and accidentally wrote that book. The book is called Leveling the Playing Field, and it's about how technology does that, how it removes obstacles and allows us to do things that, years back we would not have been able to do. And we all love that. I mean, we're all technophiles, I think. That's why we're in APCUG. The book attracted the attention of APCUG and Judy Taylor, thanks to my ACE marketing department, to whom I am married. Most of us here, I think, do love technology, and the book talks about how that technology removes obstacles and it empowers us. And I think, by and large, I took a positive approach. I really like technology, and I suspect most of you do. That's why you're doing what you do. And why wouldn't we? Technology has brought lots and lots of great stuff to us, even recently. Now, the book goes all the way back to foundational technologies like fire and language and writing and things. But even if you just look at recent technology, we have a lot of exciting stuff. Drones, GPS, 3D printing, internet-based publishing, Internet of Things. All of that serves to make life better, or sometimes longer, or just more fun. And in the book, I talk about GPS-guided tractors, which was new to me. I interviewed farmers and ranchers. I didn't realize this. Their combines and tractors and things are now beginning to be guided by GPS, very, very accurate, much less tiring for the farmer. And no doubt, eventually, more or less completely autonomous, I suppose. And then you have drones. Those consumer drones started off as just fun. But now, I mean, we're seeing drones used for crop dusting and surveying and photography, even life-saving, mapping and inspection. Talk about life-saving. On the left, you're seeing, I hope, if this is still working, you're seeing a defibrillator drone. It came out of the Netherlands, and basically what it does is it flies to a location specified by a caller, and then the operator can speak to that caller via the drones, so they can put the phone away. They can talk to the person through the drone, and they can see via the drone's camera, so they can give instructions on how to use the defibrillator. On the right is a prototype of a drone that delivers life preservers. It can fly offshore a whole lot more quickly than a lifeguard could swim or even boat out to a drowning victim. So the idea is to give the person something to help him while he waits the 2 or 3 minutes it might take for a lifeguard to reach him. Oh, look, there's me.
Yeah.
In this presentation. This technology, after all, is what makes this presentation possible. So, a few years ago, the idea of a remote presentation that included live images and real-time delivery and discussion and all that sort of thing, that would have been the stuff, I guess, of science fiction. But now we do it all the time. I mean, we FaceTime with the grandkids, and we Skype with colleagues, and we beam information, including the information needed to 3D print a wrench to the space station. It's pretty hard not to be excited about some of the cool stuff that that all this technology lets us do. Here's another great use. On the left, this is Leon. Leon was born missing some fingers on his left hand, and his dad built, for about $50, his dad built a hand, 3D printed a hand. So $50 versus thousands of dollars. And then, of course, if it breaks, they print him another one. As Leon grows and outgrows this hand, they'll print him another one. That's a pretty powerful example of barriers being removed. And that's what we're talking about. On the right, I don't know if you've seen this. This is the Indigo lightweight exoskeleton. It's this impressive combination of 3D printing, carbon technologies, and robotics. It's to help people with movement problems, including complete paralysis, move. And it was just approved by the FDA this year. It's expensive, about $80,000. There's another one called Rewalk, which you might have heard about. That was approved about a year ago, I think. Costs a little less. But of course, the point is that none of this would have been possible at all a few years ago. So we have a lot to thank technology for. However, and again, remember, I tried to take a very positive look and keep a positive outlook on all these technologies when I was writing, but you can't ignore the bad stuff. You can't ignore the risks. You know, we can go on extolling the virtues of technology, and in the book I do, but you know, you don't want to be a naive cheerleader. You don't want to be a Pollyanna. There are downsides. You're looking at a 3D printed gun, not a plastic one either. They used a laser sintering 3D printer, which is fairly expensive for now, several $1,000s. But you can be pretty sure that, well, first of all, the price will be coming down, but you can be pretty sure that even no matter how expensive it is, gangs and drug cartels, folks like that can afford to buy one or two or three. That's not going to stop them. The expense is not going to stop them. This is Zoe Quinn. She was part of one of the main victims of what was called Gamergate. And I don't know how many of you followed the Gamergate thing. When I interviewed her for the book, she and her partner Alex were basically in hiding. Gamergate began as a legitimate debate about ethics in gaming journalism. Gaming journalism is a funny sounding phrase to those of us who are not into games, and I'm not, although I think it's impressive. And but you can't ignore the fact that they're a billion, that's billion with a B, $1 billion business, that creating a game is just as complicated and almost as expensive as creating a movie. So it's a big deal. Millions and millions of people. It started off as a debate about ethics because what they said was, what some people said, was that the gaming journalists' reviews were being influenced by things other than the actual quality of the game. That would have been a good debate, and it was for about 30 minutes. And then suddenly, everything went south. Basically, it turned into a hate fest. Threats. And I don't just mean name calling. I mean, we're going to kill you kind of threats. Basically, you have people saying the things that mean children say, although many of these children were supposedly adults. You know, the kind of things that kids say, but now they're saying them via what has turned out to be the world's most effective communicative tool, the internet. And it's spilled over, this stuff spills over into the real world. Zoe and her friends were doxxed and swatted. Those are two terms with which you may be familiar, but Doxing is the release of personal documents on the internet. So, you know, Zoe wakes up one morning to discover that everything about her is posted on public forums, including her phone numbers, her social security number, all that sort of thing. And then there's swatting, which is even worse, I think. That's when someone calls the police department and says that at Zoe's house, as one example, that there are bad things going on. There's somebody with a weapon, there's somebody building bombs, there's a hostage situation. The goal is to get them to send a SWAT team out. So imagine that situation. Zoe or whomever it is just sitting there watching television or playing a game or whatever they do, and the SWAT team shows up. Got a lot of nervous, heavily armed cops. They don't know what they're walking into. And then a group of people inside a home who are not expecting this at all. What's going to happen is, and I don't think it's happened yet, but it will, someone is going to get killed. In fact, Zoe called swatting attempted murder by proxy. You kind of have to remember that these are techie people. They sort of live on the internet. This is where most of them derive their livelihood. So if you lie about them online, it affects their ability to make a living. So the internet, with all the good it has done, and I think it's probably among the most powerful of inventions, it allows people to attack. And they get to attack from a distance, and they get to attack anonymously, which is kind of scary. This is Rebecca. I won't mention her last name. She was 12 years old when she killed herself after she'd been bullied by some other girls in her school. See, this is not just a war of words. That's what I'm trying to get to, I guess, and a lot of the victims are kids. Think of what would happen if your child or grandchild were bullied. It tends to be pretty merciless because you know how kids are. Some of these kids hurt themselves. Some of them actually kill themselves. It's not like the old days. You know, people like me, I'm of a certain age, as are some of you. We tend to think, oh, big deal. We were all bullied. We lived through it. But it was different. In those days, the bullying stopped at the schoolyard gate. Now, in the digital age, bullying goes on forever. It's constant. It continues no matter where you go because, you know, these are today's kids. They're always connected, which means they're always being bullied, or at least potentially. The two of the girls who were bullying her bragged on Facebook about having driven Rebecca to suicide. One of the Sophos security writers said that, you know, you want to go after the people who commit these acts, and they do. But there's a whole other issue, and that is finding ways to hold accountable the services that enable this sort of thing. The bullying, the dissemination of what they're calling revenge porn. This is actually what Zoe said when I talked to her. It's not the people. People are good and people are bad and always have been. And it's not really the technology. It's the services like Facebook and Twitter and Instagram and all of those that won't force people to abide by the terms of their licensing agreements. That's probably the issue. What do you do about it? Well, it's not so easy to solve. This is Rob Enderle. He is a tech pundit. He used to be with IBM and a group of other large companies. He's pretty well known. I don't think he's always correct, but he's interesting. He's articulate. One of the things about him is that he's probably more conservative in his outlook than a lot of people on the tech scene. And I think that's good because I think we need that sort of balance. A lot of us techie types tend to be more liberal. We need a balanced look at these problems. He advocates something that basically approaches licensing. He didn't say the word licensing when I spoke to him, but he did say that the internet is dangerous. like guns or cars. And like guns or cars, people should have to prove that they're capable of using it responsibly. That is a very tempting approach. And I don't know if it'll work for a couple of reasons. One is some people need that anonymity. Dissidents and protesters, they need that anonymity to be safe. And some people might be talking about things, maybe psychological issues, their own sexuality, or who knows what, medical issues that would be best served by being able to talk anonymously. I suppose that in the end, there's this black market effect that overrides that anyhow. Because if you disallow a technology or block access to it, people simply find ways around the law. So there ends up being a black market internet access, which there already is, really. And this is a central theme of the book. People will get access to all technologies, and that is actually a little scary if you take it to its logical conclusion. Then we have a bunch of security issues. Now, I think, you all are pretty adept at this. You know about these things, but your kids and grandkids and colleagues and friends and neighbors, they may not realize this stuff. They don't know that just because something says it's free, there's really a cost somewhere. So free Wi-Fi is one of those things. I know in the olden days, 5 years ago, we all remember having to search for Wi-Fi. Now it's getting pretty tough to find someplace where it's not available, which is incredibly handy, but it's a little dangerous. I mean, mainly because anybody can create a hotspot. You can walk into a Starbucks with a router in your backpack, create a hotspot called Starbucks 2, or Starbucks with a Z. So now you have people logging onto this fake hotspot and they're getting compromised access. Someone could be sniffing their data. We'd kind of like to tell people don't use public Wi-Fi, but that's probably not realistic. But I suppose we could tell them, we could tell our friends and neighbors, to at least ask the name of the legitimate hotspot and, don't refinance their house or pay their bills or anything while they're there. In the end, there's no real guarantees. I mean, there's no way to guarantee that data is either safe or private. And we could warn them about all these phishing emails. You wouldn't fall for this one. Dear customer, this is your bank. We forgot your social security number and password. Why don't you send them to us so we can protect your money? I don't think anybody there would fall for that, but you might fall for this. This one was actually a very successful phishing email, and it was sent to students at Stanford University. And in spite of the fact that there's all kinds of red flags, they fell for it. Well, a bunch of them did. I mean, the from address isn't an edu or a Stanford address. There's all kinds of grammar errors. They even managed to spell Stanford with a D. I figure if you're smart enough to go to Stanford, you're smart enough to know that there's no D in Stanford. And they did. The people that fell for this, not really because they're stupid or anything. I mean, they probably wouldn't be going to Stanford. But they're in a hurry, and they're young, and they're not paying attention, and they click first and then think. And we want to get them, you want to get your friends and colleagues to think first and then click. I guess you kind of have to worry about your friends, your kids. If you're an APCUG member and you're as active as you are to be, because I can tell that because you're there, you're probably the first person your family calls when something goes wrong. And you don't want to get these calls any more than you have to. The reality is all these technologies we're talking about can be used, well, misused, I suppose, in some sort of negative way. Sometimes it's kind of roundabout. Here, you're seeing an article about the fact that some researchers have figured out a way to sabotage devices that are made on 3D printers. And there are more and more devices like that every day, aircraft parts, drones, and I mean the big ones, not just the consumer drones, power station equipment, supplies for the space station, like that wrench I mentioned earlier. You have a group of Israeli researchers, and what they did is they sent a phishing email, about those, to compromise a user's computer. And then once they had control of the computer, they downloaded his CAD/CAM files, sabotaged them, changed them, and re-uploaded them. So now when he uses that printer to print propellers for his drone, he's printing parts that are designed to fall apart when stressed. So this was an experiment, but imagine this sort of physical/cyber attack directed at engineers working at Boeing or another military contractor. And then, of course, we don't even have to talk about technology that literally blows up in our faces, right? Yeah, we won't be seeing the Galaxy Note phone for a while. This report on the left about an exploded iPhone, I inserted a question mark there because it's not yet proven. This particular one, anyway, was not yet proven. So I don't want to just make the assumption that it exploded, but we obviously know that such things happen, right? Basically, for all those positive uses, 3D printing, drones, etc., we can see negative uses. Drones can be used to spy on people. They can endanger airways. I would imagine pilots, I don't know if any pilots are in the audience, but are a little nervous, and I think they're right to be because there are idiots flying drones around near where planes land or take off. You can be pretty sure that 3D weapons, like we talked about, are coming, and they're untraceable, and they can be churned out by the dozens. Connected cars are pretty cool, but they can be and will be hacked. That whole Internet of Things thing is going to become a big issue. I don't know how many of you have read anything from John Pescator. He used to work with Gartner. Now he's with Sands. He points out that this Internet of Things stuff is not really new. I mean, some industries have been selling into it or using it for decades or more, like the medical industry. And yet nobody has done much of anything to make sure that all these devices were connecting, and there's going to be billions of them. Nobody's making sure that those connections won't lead to intrusions, which is why we hear about cars being hacked by white hat hackers so far. You remember that Jeep recall? 1.4 million vehicles were recalled because they were hackable. Baby monitors that get, monitored. We're going to add billions of these internet connections, and most of them lack the most basic forms of security. Even things that should be secure, like an insulin pump. Here is a vulnerability notes, and part of my job is to check for vulnerabilities. Even medical devices, and those manufacturers have been selling them for years, are risky. Originally, the original insulin pump was invented in 1963. By the 1970s, it was in pretty common commercial use. Now they're getting a lot smarter. They're combined with glucose monitors to help measure doses and that sort of thing. But more recently, they're becoming connected, which is very cool because it means that the device can be monitored and data can be transmitted to your doctor, and the system itself could be adjusted. So you have, or could have at least, a device that sort of provides a constant feedback loop that ensures some sort of optimal treatment. And yet, this insulin pump, after all, is just a little computer. And we know about computers. And it's got software. We know about software. And it's connected one way or another to the internet, and therefore potentially unsecured. I mentioned those vulnerability checks that I have to do as part of my job. There's so many of them that as cybersecurity coordinator, one of the things I do every week is check several vulnerability databases like this one. And then I compare the new vulnerabilities to our in-house software list. Now we have, I think, 13,000 different pieces of software and many copies of each of those. Takes hours to do this, and it's very boring until you find a problem, and then it gets very exciting. Most of them right now are talking about software vulnerabilities, but that's going to change as more and more of these Internet of Things devices come online. You know, what that leads to is that pretty much everything will be connected, and none of it will be protected. On the left, you're seeing a picture of a Jeep that was purposely hacked and forced into a ditch. It was done under controlled conditions, so nobody got hurt. In the middle is a story about webcam, baby cams that were hacked. And then, of course, you have your Hello Dave Nest thermostat. It's kind of tough to come up with something that you're not going to connect to the internet. We've seen internet-connected refrigerators and washers and dryers and toothbrushes. I don't know why anybody would connect a toothbrush to the internet, but they have. I'm not making this stuff up. All of these things are potential entry points for a hacker. A government agency, ours or theirs, who knows, terrorist or a thief, whatever. And you have to wonder about the negative uses that we can't see. You know, for all these positive things, we keep running into positive uses for technology that nobody had thought about. I mean, who thought about flying defibrillators? I didn't. That's a good thing that somebody came up with that. But we have to assume that in addition to the negatives that we're thinking about, there are probably negatives we haven't foreseen, and that may be the scariest thing of all. Because what it means is we just don't know what's going to happen. Yesterday, yesterday, there was a widespread internet outage. I don't know how many of you were affected by it or noticed it, but it was caused by a DDoS attack, a distributed denial of service attack, which is a very simple sort of hack. It's not even really a hack. But it was achieved by a botnet. And this time around, that botnet was largely made up of Internet of Things devices. It wasn't just compromised computers sitting in your den. It was routers and thermostats and washers and dryers and refrigerators and intelligent assistants sitting on your counter, that sort of thing. That's what caused that outage yesterday. One of the real risks of technology, and I know I sound a little bit like a Luddite here, is worrying about our increasing reliance on it. You know, when the internet goes away, everybody sits around and stares at each other, and we feel like we should go out and build a fire or something, because now we're all animals. But you know, I don't know what you're going to do about it. If you think about what we've gained, you can't de-technologize. Once the genie's out of the bottle, you can't put it back. And would you really want to? I mean, really? You want to go back to TB wards and iron lungs and washing your clothes by turning a crank on this sort of machinery or plowing behind a team of horses? We're kind of stuck with it, for good and bad. And I think what that means is we have to find solutions to these problems. And I think the first step in finding those solutions is simply being aware of the issues, which is kind of what this presentation has been about. I mean, I think we're all technology evangelists. I think that's what we are. And I guess that means that it's sort of incumbent upon us to help our less technologically adept friends and colleagues and relatives realize that there are risks here. There is a dark side to every technology. And that's not new. I mean, that's been the case ever since somebody used a big rock to grind leaves up into a paste and then decided to stand up and throw the rock at somebody. Now we got a whole lot of rocks and a whole lot of people throwing them around. And I think it's part of our responsibility to make sure that we're not just tech lovers. We are tech lovers, I think. I mean, I am. But we don't want to love the technology blindly without making sure that we're aware of some of these issues and making our friends and relatives, maybe especially the kids, aware of this. I worry about my granddaughter. She just sort of accepts all of this stuff, which is great because she can use it to its maximum potential. But it also means I think she probably believes more of what she sees than she ought to. So I suppose that you have kids and grandkids like that too. So I think that's the important message. I'm sorry to show you a picture of me. Didn't mean to do that. We need to be technology evangelists, but not naive ones. We want to make sure that people are aware that along with all the good that technology brings us, there is, and always has been, a potential dark side. Pointing that out, I don't think makes you paranoid. It makes you pragmatic. And besides, as Woody Allen and some others have said, just because you're paranoid doesn't mean they're not out to get you. So that's about it. I'm going to attempt to click back to the camera here. There, now you unfortunately should be seeing me again. Yeah. And we have plenty of time for questions, I think. So if anybody has questions, I may or may not be able to hear you. If I can't, then we can relay questions to John. But I'm happy to try and answer any questions or answer, reply to comments or whatever. Anybody have questions?
Bob G.
You had mentioned licensing the use of internet access. But by doing that, aren't you actually punishing the majority of the users for the misuse by the silent or by the minority of users?
I think I may have heard that, but John, could you relay anyway? Because it broke up a lot.
Yeah, we're taking a mic around. You talked about the licensing of using the internet, but going through all that process, doesn't that penalize those of us that are the good guys, forcing us to go through all that licensing to be able to use it?
Yeah, oh yeah, I think he's absolutely right. I think it does do that, and I think that's what Rob would like to do, but that's one of the reasons I don't think it'll work. I mean, it's, among other things, it's not really fair. Then again, I don't know that that's unheard of. We license all kinds of things simply because some people might misuse them. So, but by and large, yeah, I agree.
Thank you.
Okay. Bill, we got one up in the front.
Is there any engineering or very much engineering going on?
We're gonna do the microphone so that everybody hears, and maybe he hears it without me.
Is there any good engineering going on in schools, universities to make the IP protocol better and to stop some?
I didn't really hear that, John.
Okay, is there anything taking place in the schools for engineering to make the IP protocol more secure and stuff?
There's what there is that I know of, and I'm not an engineer, but I do know about entirely new protocols that are being worked on. Like I know what you're getting at, and you're saying correctly that the internet protocol was not designed with security in mind at all. It was designed to share information, and of course, when we try to secure it, all we're doing is adding, layers of Band-Aids on top of it. And so, yeah, there is work. There's a book that I mentioned in my book somebody who is basically proposing a specific protocol called a chirp for Internet of Things devices, because Internet of Things devices, they don't have to be very complicated protocols. They're just sending out little tiny pieces of data many times a second sometimes, but they're very short. And the reality is they don't have to be as error protected as the Internet protocol gives them, because if you miss a piece of data, you're just going to get another one, you know, a 20th of a second later. So they're working on new protocols, some of them specifically for the Internet of Things, because, I mean, we're not the only ones who realize that that's a big security problem.
Got another one coming up.
What can we do today, right now, to protect ourselves?
Well, I have a great book you can read.
Besides that.
No, I mean, seriously, there are, if you look at some of the security-related sites like the Sophos blog, and actually you can just Google security tips, you're going to get a whole lot of things that we have talked about. Learning how to become aware of phishing emails, not using public Wi-Fi, or if you're going to use it wisely. There's really just a whole list of security tips that you can find anywhere. I mean, I'll be happy to send some. Email me, and I have lists because I give them to employees. I give a security new hire orientation to all our new employees, and so it's like this whole song and dance, and I'll send it to you. Because it basically lists, here's a bunch of things you need to watch out for, and here's a bunch of things you should do and not do in order to stay safe.
Could you give us his email address?
Yeah, we'll put his last slide back up in a minute.
Yeah.
Or he can give it to us.
Yeah, well, you know, we'll do both. My email is rod3041@gmail.com. And if you go to the blog at rodscher.com, you know, there's contact info there too.
To answer the last question, you can simply wait for the next presentation.
No, he's saying, yeah, said the man giving, stay tuned to the next presentation for your security questions.
That's perfect.
Well, the other guy gives you another option in the other room. Okay, here comes the next question from way in the back.
Okay.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you well, sort of.
Okay, very well. My name is Lisa, and I can try to ask this question real straightforward. Regarding security, I watch frequently how loosely people send around photographs, okay? Just looking at my smartphone, as easy as a flip of a switch, on one little small change you can make on my settings, your one photo can end up in all sorts of places, on Exchange servers, on different email sites, on Google Drives, and that's great. And I watch young people with this all the time, sending pictures and really thinking that I'm a paranoid person when I say, gosh, don't you care about that? Well, I'm a licensed CPA, so I view things a little bit differently. And I think about that photo as being, let's just say somebody has a document, a bank statement. Let's pretend it's not a photo of you at a party, it's your tax returns. I wrote to Leo a report about this. I have so many questions that I've not got this question answered. What would you recommend if you were talking about financial data? I mean, thinking about how people are kind of casual with regard to photographs, PDF files, what if it was a world of financial data? Let me just comment that in the city of Chicago right now, dealing with a lot of banks there, they don't even know how to deal with it. their own employees right now are kind of spanked if they're printing off some internal document on an outside printer. And that's about the best the banks have to offer right now in protecting just internal documentation. But once something is passed, you can't control past your internal employees. We send documents to each other all the time. You might send documents to me as your accountant. What can we do to label a document frozen or not so easy to view? And that might be a loaded question.
Well, I think I got most of that question, John.
Okay.
And it's a really good question too. First of all, in terms of sending information back and forth, I think it behooves us to recommend that people use secure email services, even if those cost money. We're used to free, but like I said, free is not always free. Facebook is free, and yet they're making a fortune. And if you stop and think about how that happens, you realize that you're sort of the product here. Outlook, for example, has a secure email function. Gmail is leaning toward that now. The big question, and you touched on it in the part of your question too, was I personally tell people that I don't do anything of any import on the cloud, period. I'm not against cloud services. I use them in certain circumstances, but I would never put my personal stuff on the cloud, and I certainly would not place or allow to be placed my financial data in a cloud service. And it doesn't matter whether it's OneNote or Dropbox or whatever. It's very, very convenient, but it's potentially insecure because, like you say, basically once it's there, you have no control over it. It could go almost anywhere. And you can see this with people's, especially kids, I think, Facebook settings. They don't know that you can secure Facebook fairly well. Of course, Facebook doesn't make it easy. And kids, I think, are going to grow up to do what you're worried about them doing, which is just assume that it's only data. I mean, it's just information. I don't have anything to hide. Well, we actually do have things to hide if we want to maintain a certain level of privacy. So the main thing I tell people, other than going through the tips that I recommended earlier and the things you're likely to hear in the next presentation, is I stay away from the cloud, at least as far as important personal data goes. And if I'm going to email things, I use PGP or some other encrypted service to do it.
Okay.
Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you, but people cut out a lot, and that's...
It's a wireless mic that we're using.
Okay.
As a potential future cybersecurity coordinator, can you recommend any online resources? Or I'm definitely going to be heading to your blog right after this. I follow Steve Gibson and Troy Hunt, who's a Microsoft professional, but are there any other resources or people you would recommend strongly?
There are a couple. The first thing I would do is go to sans.org, SANS.org. They have a lot of good information about security in general and about how to become proficient in security matters. They also offer courses. They're not cheap, but they offer courses in that. I know there are schools that are offering degrees and certificates in cybersecurity now. In fact, we have a guy at work who will probably take my place when I retire in exactly 194 days. Not that I'm counting or anything, but and he's about to graduate. He's going to graduate in December, I guess, with a degree. I think it's a 2-year degree in cybersecurity. So I think there's a lot of resources, but the biggest, best first one, I think, is to go to SANS.org.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Do we have any other? Quite a lot to absorb in our head. Oh, we got another one coming up.
Oh, all right.
I was told that the safest email addresses you could get come from Sweden or Germany. Well, what's your opinion on that?
There's probably some truth to that, simply because the Europeans are much more cognizant of modern security issues than most Americans and most American companies. The laws are very strict. We have to abide by certain security rules at the company where I work for our our U.S. customers, but we also have offices elsewhere, like in different countries, and abiding by those rules and strictures is much, much more difficult. And it's much more, when you say safe, it's much more difficult for someone like a government to get access to your stash of emails in a place like in Europe in general, really, than it is here. So I would say that there's a certain amount of truth to that.
I'd like to just add to bring something attention. If you wanted to go and check on a service called Proton Mail, I got in on it on kind of like the ground level. It is a service that if you have Proton Mail and your recipient has Proton Mail, that mail is encrypted totally from the minute it leaves my computer until they get to their computer. If I were to send you a message from Proton Mail, you wouldn't be able to read it. I would have to send you a code ahead of time and say, here's the code that you'll have to use in order to open that mail. And this service is out of Sweden. They said it has to do with Lucerne or something. But I would, it's open now. Earlier it used to be you have to be invited when they were building up. But if you're concerned about that, and I've tried it, and I've sent emails to people and they can't read it because it's totally encrypted. It's also very interesting that they've come up with an idea that you can put a time limit on the message. That just like Mission Impossible, after a certain length of time, that message will no longer be available. So Proton Mail.
Yeah, that's one of those mail services I was thinking of, and it's not by accident that Proton is hosted in Europe. They do that partly because of that. They can encrypt it, and no law enforcement agency can come in. No law enforcement agency has the power to come, and even with a warrant, and tell them they have to decrypt it and show it to them. So I think we're going to see more and more of those services, and you're going to see people, companies like Google using Gmail, basically contract to companies like that. Do we have any more?
Thank you.
No? All right, well, I'm going to thank you very much. I'm going to pop that info back up on screen so you can see it if you want to jot down my blog address or my Gmail address. And again, I just want to say thanks. I want to thank you to APCUG, and thank you for listening. I hope it was interesting. It was interesting for me, so I'm glad I got to do it, and I wish I could be out there with you instead of sitting in a basement in Nebraska.
Well, and we're very thankful that you were willing to do this. Not too many people don't like to come and be there, but we sure appreciate the technology that we have, that you're almost here and we got to hear your presentation. So we thank you very much for being a part of us.
Well, it's pretty cool stuff, and thank you very much for inviting me. I appreciate it.